Let me bring in Congressman Jim McDermott, who is also a U.S. Navy veteran, and E.J. Dionne from the Washington Post. Thank you both for being here.
It's good to be here. Good to be here, Reverend.
Congressman, what do you want to hear from the president tonight?
Well, I believe that airstrikes alone are not going to win this war. So the president has got to convince us that he's got some support from the Saudis and the Emirates and the Jordanians who are willing to go on the ground. We've got 1,500 people already on the ground, and we are not going to have enough if we don't have some people from the Muslim and the Arab community to really come and help. Training the Syrians, we trained the Iraqis, didn't we? And then when it came time, they threw down their guns and ran away, and the ISIS picked them up. So I'm not sure who we're going to be training in Syria. I want to hear him talk about who he's got and who he really thinks he's training.
E.J., what message do Americans need to hear from the president tonight?
Well, I think that they want to know that he has a coherent plan to move forward. And I think that there's a lot been made of these polls that show Americans more hawkish. And indeed, since the brutal beheading of those two journalists, I think people have gotten in a more hawkish mood. But it hasn't moved as far as people are saying. Americans are willing to support airstrikes. They're very willing to support aid to the Iraqis, but they still do not want American combat forces in there. Now, I think he's got to persuade two groups of people. One, there are still people, particularly in his own party, who really worry about another re-engagement in the Middle East, and he's got to explain to them why ISIS is a threat. And then I think on the other side, he's got to persuade folks, as the congressman said, that we can make this work without sending American troops, and that we are going to get the support from the Iraqis and other Sunni Arab countries that we need.
Congressman, there is a lot of skepticism about going back into Iraq. I am one of them, but in June it was 45%. 3 weeks ago, it was 54%. Now it's 71% of people wanting to see something done, some kind of action. It shows how closely the Americans are following these events, and it shows a growing interest in doing something about this, don't you think?
One of those things you got to watch, Al. Remember who it was that drove us into this war before. It was Cheney. And Cheney's over at the American Heritage Institute today whipping up the troops and making everybody afraid again. And they're trying to drive the president into a position that he's got to be very careful that he doesn't get pushed into. George Bush was a patsy for Cheney. He never said no to Cheney on anything. But I think the president has got the will to stand up and slowly make decisions that will be best for Americans.
Well, I'm not one to agree with Cheney, but you don't think there's a threat here?
I don't think there's any threat to the United States at this moment. Surely you can say, of course, in the future there might be, but we could pull back and let the intelligence agencies keep those people out of this country. If we did nothing more than that, we could protect ourselves. The question is, why do we want to get in there and try and settle a fight that we ripped the top off Pandora's box? We're now trying to put it all back in, and it's a very difficult situation we're in.
But E.J., when Americans see journalists beheaded, I mean, I was in New York 9/11, and I know how many of us, all of us that were against the war as it started later, but many of us felt that fear, that terror. That's real. I mean, and we haven't seen since 9/11 the percentage of Americans saying they feel less safe than before the attacks. I mean, it's never gone beyond 40%. But this week, a big spike. 47% of Americans say they feel less safe than before 9/11. I mean, how should the president speak to those fears tonight?
Well, I think I was honestly surprised by that number, because I don't think we are less safe at this moment. And the president himself, who supports taking action against ISIS, has gone out of his way to say that at the moment there's no obvious evidence of a threat to us.
Right.
Nonetheless, what I think the president is trying to do is to say this is not the same as the war in Iraq. And he's really, there were two wars going on. One was against terrorists. That was the invasion of Afghanistan and the actions the president had it's taken since Osama bin Laden, counterterrorism. The president, I think, is going to go out of his way tonight to say, this is not a repeat of the Iraq War. We're not doing nation building here. What we're engaged in is a continuation of our counterterrorism campaign. And I think that's what the American people support. I do not think, and if you look at these polls carefully, they tend to show support for airstrikes, but it doesn't suggest that there is anything close to a majority for an engagement on the level of Iraq.
I want to go back in Iraq, in an Iraqi situation. Congressman Jim McDermott and E.J. Dionne, thank you both for your time tonight.
Good to be with you, Reverend.
Coming up, we'll go inside the threat from ISIS, an army that uses both Twitter and beheadings to spread terror.